The facts around the Revolutionary War are well, they're written by the victors, and King George is often described as a tyrant king, but as someone whose ancestors took the head of the last tyrant king, I take offense to that. King Charles, the son of King James, of the King James Version fame, yeah, he was batshit crazy. King George III, I don't like that term, because in all likelihood, based on evidence, he either suffered a blood disorder which caused him the mad cow up in the noggin, or he had what is more widely regarded now, probably bipolar disorder. Now, that makes some sense, a lot of sense, in retrospect. But despite Hollywood dramatization, King George was actually pretty supportive of America once they became independent. Now, he opposed the separation, true, but once they became their independent state, he said he'd be the first to greet them. You may have seen that depicted a little differently in Hollywood, but that's generally the historical side, the historically accurate side. Now, we don't like to address that because that sort of makes it look a little more amenable than what it was all that fighting for, right? Politics. So, read this from the Declaration of Independence, if you will. Follow along with me. The Declaration of Independence description of King George is a prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant, is unfit to be the ruler of free people. I'm not saying there wasn't some misdeeds and some tyranny and some bad actions. But if we're on the white supremacist train of America, let's discuss the dark corners of our patriotic psyches. And you're exactly right. England was on a path to abolish the slave trade as the Revolutionary War was even going on. Legislation like that takes a long time. And eventually in 1807, England banned the slave trade in the UK territories, which would have meant without a Declaration of Independence from the tyrant king that America would have had to stop using slaves in 1807. But King George's feelings on slavery were well noted when he was the Prince of Wales in the 1750s in an essay he wrote. A few years before that, Charles de Montesquieu's A Spirit of the Laws came out. King George read that, and it impacted him deeply, and he went on to describe his own feelings about slavery. King George never owned slaves, so here's what he said. The pretexts used by the Spaniards for enslaving the New World were extremely curious. The propagation of the Christian religion was the first reason. The next was the indigenous Americans differing from them in color, manners, and customs, all of which are too absurd to take the trouble of refuting. And of enslaving Americans, he said, the very reasons urged for it will be perhaps sufficient enough to make us hold the practice in execration.